All right, it's supposed to be 30 degrees Celsius here today. That's too hot for May, or too hot for me. Now, what I did, I've been thinking a lot about the whole salary cap thing and the whole argument for or against, blah, blah, blah. All right. This is the last year before the cap. This is where we are now. And we can all debate whether or not the NHL, whether we as fans are better off is a better question. So, back in 2003, 2004, which is only 14 years ago, the bottom salary in the NHL, the bottom team payroll was $23.2 million. Now it's $58.8 million. So that's more than doubled. The top was $77.8 million, which was Detroit. The top now, Toronto, $80.7. And some of these teams are above the cap, and there's penalties and whatnot. There's long-term injured reserve, and it makes a mess of some of this. But basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at it and ask that question that I asked yesterday. Just with a snapshot from right before the cap. And remember, at this price range, the NHL was crying, we're losing all kinds of money. We're so poor. We can't afford to pay these players. They're so greedy. $77 million here. Here, 80, 77. That's roughly the same. That's pretty good, right? But 60, 67, 65, 61, 61, 60, 54, 51, 48. Here, 75, 75, 75, 74, 74, 77. Long-term injured reserve brings Detroit down overall. 75, 74. So the fans are paying a little bit more. And the funny thing is that it does drag up that bottom team. So where Nashville was paying $23 million to its entire roster and made the playoffs that year, lost in the first round to Detroit. And Detroit had that number one payroll, but Detroit also had a loss in the second round. And of course, the key thing is, do you win Stanley Cups based on it? It's interesting to see, too, that Chicago was down here with $31.6 million. They were in the dregs at that point. 59 points overall for Chicago that year. The New York Rangers were number 2 in payroll, $77 million. 69 points as a team, so it cost them more than $1 million for each point the team got. Number 2 this year in the NHL, $77.6 million. The Blackhawks got 76 points, more than $1 million for every point Chicago got. So there's definitely some equals here. And remember, there's more points awarded now than there were in 2004 due to shootouts, yada, yada, yada. Capitals are third. Dallas was third. Boston, Philly, Toronto. Toronto's always high. Toronto's number 1 now. They were number 5 back then. They had 103 points that year. They had 105 this year. And it's interesting. Like, San Jose's down here, but they only paid $34.8 million for their salaries. They had 104 points, and they reached the third round that year. San Jose this year, $71.5 million, 100 points, and they're out in the second round. So some things changed, and a lot of things stayed the same. It's and it's interesting because you can't just buy your way to the Stanley Cup. Detroit, $77.3 million, 73 points. Vancouver, $75 million, 73 points. But one thing that I wanted to point out, too, is 7 of the top 10 teams in salaries back in 2004 made the playoffs. So 3 of them didn't, and those 3 being the Rangers, the Ducks, and the Capitals. 2 of the bottom 10 made the playoffs, which are Nashville and Tampa. Tampa won the Cup with 106 points. The Cup winner was number 21 in overall salary. Team 30 in the playoffs, as I said, Nashville. Your final 4 teams, where they were in the salary structure, 4th, 19th, 20th, and 21st. So it was Philly, Calgary, San Jose, and Tampa were your final 4 in 2004. Now, we fast forward to now. 5 of the top 10 teams with salary, in terms of salary, make the playoffs, according to Cap Friendly. 4 of the bottom 10 made the playoffs, but the bottom 3 all missed. The bottom 3 were Edmonton, Carolina, and Arizona. And we know Edmonton's going to go up this chart next year, thanks to the extension for Connor McDavid kicking in. So they're not going to be a happy team next year if they bounce up into this area and they're still out of the playoffs. The final four, 3rd, 11th, 22nd, and 24th in cap hits. So again, and I mentioned in the video I did yesterday where teams will kind of fudge the numbers a little bit, and some of these are kind of fudged. There's contracts that teams have that are buried. There's dead money floating around. There's stuff that goes on, and there are teams that are above the cap, but they use long-term injured reserve to keep themselves under it, or they bury contracts in the American Hockey League to get under it, which is not as easy as it was before the last lockout. Before the last lockout, you could see like a Wade Redden just buried. He's gone. We cut him out. He's gone. Can't do that anymore. But again, and this is kind of true. If you look at the top 3 teams, Washington's in the Stanley Cup conference final as I'm recording this, but the top 2 teams were Toronto and Chicago for money. They didn't make it. Detroit, if not for long-term injured reserve, would actually be 3rd, and it's the Johan Franzen coming off, right? And they didn't make the playoffs either. So it again, and I said this about back then, smart money. Spend your money wisely. You have to. Colorado, who had 100 points that year, they are down in 7th place. Vancouver is all the way down here with 101 points. 102 points for Ottawa, 93, 91, 104 for Boston, 81 for LA, 159 for Washington, even though they spent more money than everybody down here. So when people say, well, you couldn't get rid of the cap because everybody would go to the same teams. Yeah, and it didn't work out for the Rangers, and it didn't work out for Toronto either. Toronto always was one of the highest paying teams, and they didn't win. Philly was always a high paying team. They didn't win. Dallas would pay a lot of money. Dallas won that one cup in 99, but outside of that, there really wasn't a whole lot that their buying got them. So I'll leave it up to you guys to decide whether or not the money side of things makes a huge difference. In this salary cap era, obviously the difference between first and last on this chart is 22.9 million. No, 21.9 million. And it's a $54.6 million difference between these two. Really what the cap has done is try to protect GMs from themselves. And it's just shown that GMs will just spend to the cap. Quite often they'll just spend to the cap. I have no doubt in my mind that if we didn't have a salary cap, we'd see a $100 million payroll for teams like Toronto. But that doesn't necessarily mean you win anything. And that was the truth before this took place. And I remember when they wiped out a whole season to get cost certainty, and all I could think was Tampa wasn't a big spending team and they won the cup against Calgary, who also were not a big spending team, and Calgary's a small market. So it's kind of weird that since the salary cap went into effect, Pittsburgh, who spend a lot of money and have 2 of the key players in the league, have won the cup 3 times. Detroit's won the cup. Boston won it. Chicago won it 3 times, and LA won it twice. You don't see a lot of the small market teams getting in there. Carolina, that's it. It's just strange because they will always frame it that the salary cap, it helps all the small market teams, make it so everybody's the same. It doesn't, though. It really doesn't. Carolina and Arizona were here before the salary cap kicked in. Now they're down here. So the weird part is Buffalo was not at the bottom then, and Buffalo isn't at the bottom now. So Buffalo's willing to spend the money, even though we all talk about how they're small market. Florida, though, Florida has stayed relatively low across the last 15 years of hockey in terms of their salary structure. But I still say winning a Stanley Cup is based on how well you build that team, not based on how much money you spend. Let me know why I'm wrong in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And this should be the end of the economics section of the Hockey Guy. I think I've covered this from every angle that I can. And let me know your thoughts. It'd be fun to hear them. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Enjoy the sun if you've got it where you're at. It's going to be nice and hot out. I'm still going to be in here doing videos for you guys, though. I'll talk to you again soon.